Welcome to Unlayered, the show where we explore next generation blockchains. I'm your host, Dave, and I'm joined by Farhaj Mayan today, who is the co-founder of Forma. This is a project which has the vision of creating Solana Economic Zones around the world. So as I understand it, it's the purpose of these crypto native zones is to help build bridges between the Web3 economy and the economy of various techno-optimistic nations around the world. I think super interesting topic, very big, grand vision that you're bringing to the crypto sphere, Farhaj. So very happy to have you here. And how are you doing today?
Pleasure to be here. Doing great. Excited to chat.
Love it. So kick us off. Can you tell us a bit about your background and how you got involved in cryptocurrency and thinking about economic zones of all things?
Yeah, I'll try to speed run through it. So I was a two-time venture-backed founder. My second company was in the RegTech space. So we built the labor law compliance platform that helped large institutions like Comcast and Flexport manage independent contractor compliance. The gig economy is a big point of scrutiny from the Department of Labor because they're trying to figure out what the actual employment status looks like for a lot of these people. So, unintentionally have worked in understanding the regulatory side for a long period of my life. Fortunately, I had a pretty successful outcome with that second business. And then I joined the founding team of another Andreessen Horowitz-backed startup named BuildSpace, which is really cool. So before I get into BuildSpace, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago during Miami Tech Week, when I hosted a hacker house in Miami for a lot of people who I became internet friends with, over Clubhouse mostly. And there were two guys that were very interesting who pulled up there. One of them was Barrett, who now started Mountain DAO. And so he was a friend of a friend. Yeah. And a lot of stories from people I've heard across the ecosystem, he really Solana filled me and a lot of my friends. I was not crypto native at all before that. I hadn't even interacted or, bought my first Ethereum or Bitcoin at that point. But, I've always been a very product minded person. And the promise of Solana at that time was super fascinating. The idea of this cheap, fast, extremely scalable infrastructure that people can build applications on top of that's permissionless. And so, yeah, I bought some Solana and started to mess around in the ecosystem. I was I still remember minting a Bold Badger, that was around Aurora, DJ Nathan, but it was very early, right?
Yeah, that's what I got in.
Yeah. So it was a very beautiful time because there was this financially empowered internet native community that was running multiple experiments, basically, right? Leveraged by tech. And so on my nights and weekends, instead of whatever I worked on full time, was always spending it, contributing to, participating in a lot of the things in, the Solana economy. And so at BuildSpace, when I joined, we were making a lot of the open source content that was driving developers to create Web3 applications for the first time. So that was the first iteration of BuildSpace. We had launched these Solidity courses that got 50, 60,000 people building on Ethereum and some layer twos. And so because I was already very Solana pilled, I pitched to Farhaj, the founder, is what if we think about launching intro to developing on Solana course, right? And then we launched and it went super viral. And so that's kind of where in the early days, we started to work with the larger Solana ecosystem and the foundation to help a lot of people kind of onboard into building on Solana for the first time. I visited a handful of hacker houses, got involved and contributed where I could with super teams and stuff. And then BuildSpace kind of took a life of its own. It eventually evolved to become the world's largest tuition-free school for entrepreneurs. And so it was really cool. Over 200,000 people from over 110 countries participating in these quarterly 6-week kind of festivals where they'd make, their first thing that people cared about. Everything from animes to films to people making super successful, even some venture backed, crypto and AI applications. And so towards the tail end of my time there, me and my now co-founder, Babak, actually led the government BD and strategy team at BuildSpace. So we were talking to about 20 or more ministries from countries around the world, helping think about how, we can use some of this infrastructure to drive economic development through entrepreneurship. On a kind of flexible scale, though, not specifically startups, right? Also SMBs, because we were seeing a lot of people making businesses that led to their first $1,000 earned on the internet. And so during that time, we're talking to a lot of different countries. There were countries like the UAE and Japan that had a surplus of dollars and a deficit of talent. And then there were countries like Argentina, Kenya, Tanzania that were really promising, that had a surplus of talent and a deficit of dollars. And, because Build Space is a venture-backed company, it had to focus a lot on the commercially viable options, right? When we were exploring that, and we even got an opportunity to explore building a startup neighborhood in one of those countries. But at the highest level, when we kind of realized that was possible, I think, Build Space wanted to pursue the internet school, which was the most ambitious kind of side of the project, in my opinion. And I got the itch to build something again. And so basically on one of our road trips back from Abu Dhabi, I was talking to Babak, and I was like, man, you remember our conversations with like Kenya and, Argentina and a lot of these different countries. I really think the opportunity here could be Solana, right? And he's like, what are you talking about? Because, he comes from an amazing Web2 background, where he was like the co-founder of Plug and Play, which is the largest venture capital fund and corporate and government innovation platform in the Middle East. They have offices all across the region. He's attracted like hundreds of startups. He has a lot of experience kind of working with governments to think about talent attraction, business attraction, FDI and DDI. And he was like, what do you mean, Solana? And you're like, how is crypto like the solution to this? And, it's kind of when I had the first iteration of this thought where I, in my opinion, view Solana as an economic zone native to the internet. And, there's now hundreds of thousands of, users, investors, founders, builders, developers, and even a very robust creator economy of people who natively contribute their time and labor over the internet and earn in dollars or tokens. And so I think it's like kind of one of the earliest manifestations of this like network state concept, with people who are actually leveraged and completely independently sovereign, with access to the financial tooling to kind of like tap into this like global economy. And I was like, I think, if we kind of refactor how we view, economic corridors and, intercountry trade and public-private partnerships, if we almost thought about Solana as a country, there's a lot of these FDI-related projects that they're running that they might not be aware of that they're doing today that governments would be very interested in, right? Superteams, when they go and activate a country, they're creating millions of dollars in economic growth, right? From direct investment into events to helping people earn crypto for the first time, upskilling people through tuition-free developer schools to, eventually them getting extremely high-paying competitive jobs on the global scale that are competitive with American jobs, not competitive to the jurisdiction that they're based in. And so it was really fascinating. And we were like, it would be really interesting to explore a concept where we kind of helped, become these like acceleration zones within countries and aggregated a lot of the amazing purchasing power and the products within the ecosystem and help them go to market in some of these countries. And for the countries, help them develop programs that drove local economic development. So that was around Q4 last year. And earlier this year, after Babak and I left Build Space, we're like, let's go all in on this and kind of explore further. And then Forma was born. Yeah.
Love it. I mean, a lot of people do talk about cryptocurrency being a country, being this worldwide economy. I don't know what that would make an unlayered podcast. I think it would be some like propaganda statist broadcasting network. But yeah,
I think like the media platform,
Yeah. But I think you're taking what a lot of people have in them ambition of what these things can become and really trying to push that forward, much in the same way that we're seeing from people like Balaji, which I'm sure we'll get into. But I mean, I think my first question is, can you give examples of economic zones which exist sort of outside of cryptocurrencies and what they generally tend to entail?
Absolutely. I think if you look historically, the first ever economic zone was actually in Ireland. They really wanted to incentivize like the airline industry for it to be one of the more successful, both commercial and independent kind of travel hubs within the region. So they started to roll out, regulations that were bound as kind of like experimental regulations to a physical piece of land, within the country to allow international businesses to have, a very competitive place to come and set up, their primary travel hub and getting access to a lot of perks. Two of the most well-known economic zones, I'd say, are one Shenzhen in China, right? And so, and the second one would be like the IFC in Dubai. If you look at the example of the UAE, it's a country that's only 50 years old, right? And the IFC particularly is extremely impressive, for considering the age of this country, because when the country was created, it had primarily like, a Sharia law framework within the existing internal legal system. But for multinational corporations that wanted to take advantage of the strategic location of the United Arab Emirates, as an amazing potential travel hub, amazing place for ports to exist, but also amazing time zone to have, kind of cross-lateral business relations spanning from Europe all the way to Southeast Asia. it was hard for like a McKinsey or a BCG to come up and easily set up, a hub here, because they didn't have the same type of ease of doing business. It took a lot longer to set up a business. Second, most of these institutions follow the common law framework, right? British common law. And that was not the existing legal framework. So arbitration would be really difficult. And then the third thing, I think was immigration framework, right? UAE at that point didn't have a large enough concentration of talent to be able to easily hire and have the right kind of talent to be able to kind of facilitate the growth of these companies. And so what they did is they crafted this like experimental zone, where this zone, which they called Dubai International Financial Center, had its own court system that was one-to-one with British common law. Second, instead of waiting months to set up a business, you could set up one in like anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. It's gotten even faster now. And then the third thing is now you can even have like dollar denominated funds and dollar denominated bank accounts and multi-currency bank accounts and set that up. And fourth is to each business, they tied in the ability to easily grant visas to immigrate talent for your company, and then that led to just like an explosion of growth and attracting businesses to the country. If I'm not wrong, I think they're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in assets that are now managed just within that small piece of real estate within the country. And Dubai has even gone so far in the larger UAE country to kind of enable different niche specific free zones that can attract and incentivize businesses in different jurisdictions into the country, right? And really good example of that is like Abu Dhabi General Markets, which is now an entire island that's a free zone, which is a really good kind of regulated financial hub. They have 2454, which is now an entire free zone dedicated towards media, right? They have Hollywood sets where production companies can come and like, they just shot like Dune 2 over there, and they have like stunt areas and stuff like this. And so they're kind of building little villages that have their own legal jurisdiction that's kind of catered to these independent kind of like business economies to enable them to really thrive using, the safety, the banking infrastructure, and now some of the more robust regulatory infrastructure that UAE is able to do. And I think, I don't know, have you heard of like Prospera?
No, I don't think so.
It's really cool. So Prospera is another special economic zone that's actually in Honduras. And they've been getting a lot of attention because they have what they call ZEDEs, and it's a really progressive regulatory jurisdiction where for your business, you can essentially kind of pick and choose legal frameworks from other jurisdictions that might really apply to you, right? So if you're like a biotech company, for example, you can choose to have like a certain type of regulatory framework from the United States and something from Singapore and something from somewhere else, and kind of package it collectively together, go through their approval process, and then have a licensed entity that's able to kind of work on some more bleeding edge products, right? And benefit from that. So I think a lot of countries are getting smarter about economic zones, and it's going to be a very big point of focus, I think, over the next handful of decades, specifically for economic development.
I think maybe another interesting example of an unofficial one was Silicon Valley potentially, because suddenly you have this area where suddenly you could get access to venture capital really easily. And probably the interesting thing about that was more of a citizen-led initiative. It wasn't necessarily coming from government, whereas I think the examples you're using is more top-down government initiatives. So I'm just wondering, with your approach, obviously you're a company, you're not a government, so you're trying to speak to relevant governments of techno-optimistic countries. Is this going to be a citizen-led thing where it blossoms and hopefully it starts receiving regulatory approvals and tax benefits and things like that? Or do you see it as more you're going to speak to governments and get them to lead a sort of top-down initiative?
That's a really good example, because like within the Solana ecosystem too, I think there's a lot of entities, right, that work on both like the bottom up and top down approach. We definitely take the top down approach. I think Superteam does an amazing job, now even like Mountain DAO and Island DAO, where they find a piece of land that's pretty accessible and deeply integrated into the local community and attract, amazing people from within that local community, or the large international community to come and understand how they can capture and create value, within that country. I'm sure you come across like Alex from Superteam UAE's amazing content on Twitter. Now he has government officials and, even large investors within the region coming and learning about, Solana through this community-led movement. For us, I think, it is more of a top-down approach, but we kind of take it in 3 phases. And so from our experience of dealing with governments, we've learned that they love it a lot more and they're getting a lot more excited when you show them versus tell them about what's really possible. And so the first phase of Solana Economic Zones is where we usually find a very strong local partner, mostly government, like in the example, Argentina. We've been in close contact with the city government of Buenos Aires. And then other like local large crypto leaders, nodes, communities, they've already tapped into the ecosystem and are thinking about how to kind of like take the country and its infrastructure to the next level. And then we host these like curated 150 to 200 person economic zone assemblies. So that's what we're going to do in Argentina this August, where we bring in, primarily a curated group of, founders or building products that have really high potential to help a lot of people within that country, which is a great go-to-market channel for them. Second, builders or developers who natively contribute their time over the internet and earn in dollars or tokens. You can think about that like a crypto native digital nomad, and the dollars that they can bring into a country is actually really valuable, and countries are actively trying to figure out how to attract them to their country. Third is like, investors and grant managers and foundations are looking to deploy capital into, the local economy and enable community founders or projects. And fourth is policymakers and leaders who have a very deep understanding of some of these regulatory frameworks and have actively worked on special economic zones in other countries, such that during that 1 month, it is like the most productive time on the planet, not just for people who are attending. But government is also sending a lot of local delegates. A lot of local crypto leaders are also attending. So through osmosis, right, they can have a ridiculous learning curve and understand what is the most ideal, regulatory framework or perspective or purview that they can kind of adopt based on their learnings from all of these different things to create, hopefully a community-led economic zone first and eventually evolve into a physical one. So that's how we think about like the phase one. And then we kind of accelerate pretty quickly after, we go into a phase two where once we have that understanding and when we know, what kind of programs can actually attract dollars into the country or create new jobs, we plan to sign an MOU with that local institution to kind of formalize a lot of the investments that either the foundation or the larger Solana ecosystem are already making into countries, right? I think All Stars, Superteam, even Coliseum, they're all very good examples of this. They're actively deploying capital into these countries, but it's just not formalized. And then hopefully, when that pilot goes really well over 6 months, and if there's a really good local surface area of talent that reside within the country that's mostly Solana enabled and aligned, we want to kind of go ahead and move forward to figure out a public-private partnership to build or enable physical Solana economic zones and hubs, either within an existing economic district, kind of like an ADGM or DIFC in Dubai, and use their framework, or if they don't have one yet, work very closely with the government to test out a new either digital or physical economic zone that could really benefit its citizens and attract a lot of international talent. So that's how we think about it.
I think I'm still slightly confused about what exactly this will enable, because you keep talking about the opportunity to bring dollars to the country, to the city. I mean, are we talking about just people from wealthier countries coming in and putting investment into that country in the local currency, or are we actually talking about real dollars hitting bank accounts in Argentina? And then is that what this economic zone, or is that what cryptocurrency is enabling, the ability to have a sort of multi-currency economic zone? Can you just talk more around that?
Totally. I think you think about it like two parts. So if we take away like the special economic zone as a concept and just think about the people within that country, particularly the global south, where most of these countries have, strict capital controls. Some of them have extremely high inflation. The return on investment for value and time for people that live within these countries is very low, right? Time is becoming a depreciating asset. And if you spend time physically in Argentina or Congo or Kenya, you would notice that there's a ridiculous high demand for dollars, right? So what people don't realize is that through just the access to an internet connection, now that they can go and earn, natively in dollars and preserve their purchasing power and kind of be enabled by a lot of the utility that crypto's created. So what needs to happen is first, like the education awareness of that, but also, to help products that can bring that massive kind of adoption, on chain. And so for that to happen, I think you need to kind of like set up a few seeds of empowering amazing local communities or seeding a handful of new ones that can drive that. And very good examples of that are like Superteam, right? Like in Argentina, for example, there isn't Superteam Argentina yet, but a huge win for us after assembly would be finding someone who's capable of leading that and maybe introducing them to the foundation. Same with All Stars, right? They have in Turkey and Nigeria, huge footprint, with regional leads going and literally teaching people how to earn their first crypto versus buy it. What they're missing is the right kind of talent, the right kind of people, and the right introductions from local kind of ecosystem to help them very easily go to market within that country and bring more people on chain. Mm-hmm. So V1, what we really think about is how do we kind of make a lot of these kind of direct programs that can help bring a lot more activity from land to the Solana ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And in return, how do we bring a lot of dollars through direct investment, like, jobs, right? Like, tuition-free developer schools, like a lot of these public goods that are internet native today that could have physical counterparts into that country to create this like kind of magnet and movement that can eventually evolve into something a lot more sophisticated. So that's how we're thinking about it today.
And then does it actually have to be within a constricted zone? Like, would there need to be specific rules in place to allow this to happen? Because it sounds to me that all you need to do to make that happen is just have an internet connection, which could happen throughout the whole of Argentina rather than in a small area of Buenos Aires and obviously in any other country. So why does it have to be a zone? Are there particular restrictions or policies that need to be put in place?
Great question. I mean, from what we've learned from talking to a lot of Argentinian founders today is that ease of doing business is extremely low in Argentina, right? If you're thinking of, moving from completely on-chain activity to something in between and becoming an actual registered institution within the country, it takes about 7 to 8 months to set up a business. It's really hard to get a bank account. It's hard to hold dollars in your bank account. So this essentially adds a lot of friction for you as a founder for being able to just double down and improve your business. Mm-hmm. And also makes it very good for you to choose, Delaware, BVI, or Cayman, or is your existing legal jurisdiction and primary place of holding your assets. Mm-hmm. That is a huge missed opportunity for Argentina, where there are already multiple extremely successful crypto companies, right? You think about Lemon, you can think about Bello, you can think about Ripio. These are huge consumer payments, crypto products, right? That have gotten mass adoption, but are actively having a very difficult time understanding, how they and future founders just like them could proudly base their company in Argentina versus having to choose some of these other jurisdictions. And it's same for international talent, right? If I were to choose to immigrate to Argentina today, it'd be really hard for me to set up an operating company just to have a lot of my assets parked in Argentina versus choosing another legal jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. So that is a very big opportunity for the country to capture and retain dollars, right? And the only reason they're not able to do that today is because, they haven't figured out the right regulatory framework or, experimental frameworks that would allow them to test out what sort of economic development they could drive by launching an initiative like that. And I'll give you a really good example. So while Solana Economic Zone is happening, in Argentina, we're actually part of a larger movement called Crecimiento that has a 20-block radius within Buenos Aires city in a really amazing neighborhood called Palermo that is in a regulated sandbox under CABA, which is the city of autonomous Buenos Aires, their local government. And within that zone, during the duration of this program, basically you have full, confidence to go test out any crypto native application. You can go and easily, in a kind of regulatory co-signed way, go and onboard local restaurants, try out crypto payments and test a lot of products that if you need to do it in a regulated way today would take just a ridiculous amount of time. And so that in itself is showing a lot of promise, right? And if it is a registered regulated kind of like sandbox within the government, what you can do is at the end of the program, showcase a lot of the data, right? In terms of net new dollars attracted in the country, in terms of possible investments into the country by virtue of the businesses who are participating, who are communicating their interest to set up here if XYZ, incentives or kind of like infrastructure existed. You can show that data now to the government through the existing regulatory process and potentially appeal for the sandbox to become extended over 20 years, maybe, right? Become a sandbox zone, or for the sandbox to get co-opted by the national government to potentially become a special economic zone. And in Argentina's example specifically, I'm not going into the details to be helpful, but there are a lot of the provinces that are outside of Buenos Aires who actually cashed in their free trade zone card, right? Whether it's for machinery or for ports or for cattle, they've asked for special exemption and incentives to be offered through their province to be able to attract that type of business and be a great hub for that business. Mm-hmm. The city of Buenos Aires, as far as I'm aware, hasn't done that yet. So this is a huge opportunity for them to be able to petition for a crypto economic zone or a crypto sandbox zone that could be an amazing place for people to choose to maybe set up their company when they're first starting, or maybe set up the regional HQ or their operating company in as they kind of land and expand within that region, without having to fold a lot of their assets in other jurisdiction, if that's what they're interested in. So things like this are really fascinating. And I think, when we look at like media today, we come across like end states, so like special economic zones a lot, right? Like the DIFC, like the Shenzhens that have gone through decades of iteration. And for a lot of these countries in the global South, they're trying to understand what are more like minimum viable versions of that they could kind of ship to essentially iterate towards them getting to the same level that they are at too. So that's some of the work that we want to do, right?
So I suppose just to recap, but the different regions around Buenos Aires, they each have been given like basically a card where they can get exemption on a particular industry to try and attract industries. But the Buenos Aires, the center of Buenos Aires, has not yet used that free card, if you like. And therefore
to that province.
To that province. And therefore there is an opportunity that crypto could be the industry which gets the exemption if enough work gets done. Super interesting. I think a lot of, the examples that you gave were maybe like regulatory arbitrage type examples. You want to set up a business and serve people in this local area without maybe having to jump through all the hoops in order to be able to do that. How does that work with crypto? What sort of businesses or because crypto is inherently a digital international product and it's less about directly serving the local customers, maybe something like the Uber competitors, things like that, using crypto, things like that. I could see it because then you don't have to get the license to try and become an Uber competitor. You can just go out and try and do it. But just wondering how that would relate for crypto companies, if you have any examples.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, in terms of like peer-to-peer adoption, and the beautiful thing about crypto is it's generally like permissionless, right? You get more competitive rates for your USDT on Tron, just at one of the squares where there's a lot of homies hanging out, talking about what their active trading rate is. I've been in WhatsApp groups, where people are literally like talking to each other to do fiat to crypto on-ramp and off-ramp. There's a ridiculous amount of demand, I think, and liquidity, for the other counterparts for crypto in these countries. And that's amazing because you can drive, peer-to-peer adoption. 1/3 of Argentinians, for example, use or hold crypto, which is unbelievable, right? Yeah. 4 out of every 10 people in Latin America who open a crypto app, they live in Argentina. So this is a country that's already aware of and, very active in its usage of crypto on a day-to-day basis. Because in my mind, how I see it is, Western countries like the United Kingdom or United States or even the UAE, to a certain part, we have amazing financial infrastructure. So, mostly a lot of the activity that happens on crypto is kind of like the bleeding edge financial activity that it gives us an opportunity to test without having to go through the kind of regulatory frameworks that are primarily built for investor protection reasons, right? Within these countries. But in the global South, they have a very difficult time because capital controls are being created because they're trying to save most of their economies. And it has unintentionally a very difficult impact on, the day-to-day experience of the average citizen. And that's where, crypto is really being able to serve them, especially stable coins. So I think, there's the community-led onboarding of crypto, but when there's amazing regulatory framework that exists for crypto businesses to become institutionalized and get support, and, do things like, give access to, I think a really good example in Argentina is Javier Milei recently launched a law that allows for, the real estate transactions to be done in Bitcoin and to be recognized legally. It's not tender, but that's huge, right? Now you have a more reliable asset to do a lot of your transactions than it to be like denominated under pesos. And things like that really help legitimize and bring a lot more excitement around like the large scale adoption of crypto. Even if you think about some of the fintechs that you talked about, it would be a huge opportunity for them to actually be able to allow for stablecoin payments, right? Like if you're a Ripio driver or, if you have like a new bank account, being able to actually get your earnings in fiat and then immediately convert it into USDC and hold it to preserve your purchasing power is a huge opportunity, not for the individual, but also for the business to now start making revenue, by getting a handful of points on enabling that conversion to happen and holding revenue in dollars, right? And that being permitted by the government is very interesting. So I think for a lot of these primitives to exist, we have to kind of find a fine balance between enabling the kind of libertarian crypto native spirit to continue to prosper, while at the same time having a little bit of sophistication to help countries understand that it's a huge opportunity, not a detriment, for them to enable for a lot of these existing companies and crypto native companies to thrive in their country. And usually when we go to governments, I think the example that we use, because it's just a great example and it speaks to their language, is like Zug, right? Now it's called like Crypto Valley in Switzerland. I mean, it was just like one mayor and a handful of like local leaders who were really excited. And they were like, I think this industry is going to be big. You know, Switzerland has a lot of reputation of like one of the banking capitals in the world. Like, what if we provided access to a lot of our financial services and infrastructure and amazing regulatory and legal system to crypto companies that in under a decade, you know, they've attracted $500 billion worth of capital in the country just by virtue of the top 50 companies and foundations that have set up there. That is unreal, right? It's created over 5,000 jobs. Real estate within that broader area, the price of it has increased by 25%. And now it's like known as, you know, the place where Ethereum went to grow up. And like, that's really awesome, right? And so that should be a very clear opportunity for a lot of these other countries to try to capture themselves from the amazing crypto products that are being created by their own people and for the ones that are looking to expand into their countries.
Just to go back slightly to what you were saying about the national currency and people storing their wealth in USDC to preserve purchasing power and exchanging in Bitcoin. What do you think is going to be the intention of the Argentinian government or the end state around their currency? Because obviously they have pesos, which has not been doing very well of late. I mean, do you think that it just eventually collapses? Or, you know, why would they allow people to escape this pretty torrid national currency? It seems a potentially difficult sell.
Yeah, but I mean, if you kind of follow the existing doctrine of the national government, right? I'm not speaking on behalf of them, but just what's been communicated through the news and commercially through media. The new president is a very big proponent of figuring out a way how to abolish the central bank. And he's trying to understand how there's a very clear path towards dollarizing the economy. The problem is, you know, Argentina doesn't have enough dollars on hand to be able to actively dollarize the economy. You know, but now you have this amazing permissionless financial system. You have USDC and USDT. And it could unintentionally become an amazing mechanism to drive peer-to-peer dollarization of the entire economy to get closer towards that goal, right? And so I think, again, on the investor protection side, on the regulatory side, on, you know, the education and awareness side, there's a lot of work to be done. But at the macro level, a lot of countries, I think within, you know, the global south are understanding of how this could be a very big opportunity for them, you know, to turn around their economy in a very short period of time. And enable people to be able to be lifted out of poverty. Honestly, that's their primary goal. So I think we can see at, you know, the country level, this is the kind of perspective that they're starting to have nowadays.
Yeah, it's because I think Ecuador adopts the US dollar from memory. I remember traveling there a long
El Salvador
time ago.
as well.
Yeah. And obviously what you gain in hopefully helping people come out of poverty, you lose in the ability to you know, make the decisions around your own currency. Albeit the euro is an example where people have given up their sovereignty around their own currency and accepted that they're willing to do that in exchange for a stronger currency. So there are plenty of examples of where people have done that. And certainly for like Eastern Europe, that's been a bit of a boon and definitely has helped lift a lot of them out of poverty. When we talk about Solana economic zones, crypto economic zones, it does sound very similar to things that Balaji talks about with his network states, where communities form around shared values and leverage crypto and digital infrastructure. There's also, I don't know if you've read The Sovereign Individual, where he predicts, like, it's a great book, love it. But he predicts, the decline of nation states and suggests that there'll be lots of like micro sovereignties empowered by technologies and their own sort of native internet currencies. So do you think that these economic zones are just purely there as a potential regulatory arbitrage, as we were saying, or allow companies to do more than they could in the rest of the country? Or do you think they could start to form real communities and empower more these other aspects, the social side of things within these economic zones?
100%. I mean, I think there are already like existing examples of that, right? The pop-up city movement, you know, which like started off, I think technically with Zuzalu, like in Montenegro, when they first did their month-long program that brought a lot of Ethereans to come together, discuss big opportunities. But was also attended by a lot of people, from like the local kind of crypto ecosystem, plus also some leadership from government. The ability for people within crypto to coordinate is really magical, right? And what's awesome is it's not just like a coordination by virtue of voting with your feet, but it's also like coordination by virtue of voting with your talent and by voting with your resources. And so, there are a lot of like interesting new primitives that I think can exist to enable for independent success for a lot of these community-led things that can also eventually be formalized. Like I've been thinking for a long time about validators as an ability to drive economic development. Just like countries are able to give rebates and incentives for data centers, to compete for like the AI wars, they should be able to do the exact same for validators, that can now like generate revenue and reinvest back into their economy in different formats. That is like a very scalable framework that also kind of contributes towards like the decentralization of the network and the network state. And so I think very aligned with the thesis, I don't think necessarily in the next decade, we need to actively go and try to build a country from scratch and get the passport recognized. The more pertinent thing for me and my team that we personally care about is like, how do we drive economic development and get people access to this global financial machine, right? And how do we make it very easy and increase the ease of doing business in crypto in these different jurisdictions, from dedicated, safe on-ramps and off-ramps, to give more utility for Solana, the asset, and all the assets that live within the Solana ecosystem in physical jurisdictions, right? And help like cloud partner with land. I think that's really interesting to us. And that's why even, we're not directly pursuing building an entire Solana economic zone from scratch, because, the framework of that and the infrastructure behind that might not necessarily be helpful to every single jurisdiction. It's better to understand the needs of the local market and kind of pattern match a product that enables mobility for people on the Solana network state, but also at the same time, has the ability to really contribute towards growth within that local economy. And so that's like what we're interested in. So I think this is kind of like the first kind of like, one or two phases leading up to that. And we know there are people working all across the network state spectrum. You have like Plexus that's going and trying to build a city in the Mediterranean, using a special economic zone as their primary kind of like USB. You have like VibeCamp and you have like Cabin, and there's a lot of these decentralized communities that are figuring out different forms of organizing. And so I think we're just like one of those people who really wants to explore this premise and understand what's the most sustainable way to scale that,
I think Balaji does a network states. He only did one day during last year's Breakpoint. So
yeah,
are you going to be involved with that, or have you received the invite yet?
I'm definitely going to go attend. I know he's doing a network state camp too, which is kind of like a summer camp for people working on network states, but I'll be in Argentina in that time. So unfortunately going to miss that.
Nice. Then is that for this where you're going to basically be having 150 people who have been invited? So yeah, that'll be over Breakpoint. I just wanted to touch on that. So I saw, for example, you've got Hard Hat Chad coming from Ore Supply, who we've had on the pod as well. Really interesting project. And is that another way? You were just talking previously about validators, but do you see that as another way that, and in a way, like a much simpler way, because really you only need a mobile phone once his V2 is out. Another way.
Or just a Raspberry Pi.
And
you can mine and earn your first crypto, and all you have to give it is electricity, which is really cheap and abundant in Argentina, for example. Right.
Yeah. And then the other people that you're bringing, is it generally to give the local population ideas in ways that they could earn crypto or US dollars? And any other examples of teams or individuals that you think will be interesting?
Yeah, for sure. So I think about 70% of our attendees are actually from the wider LATAM region, with over 2/3 of them actually from Argentina. And what was really hilarious is the first time when we went to do a lot of our discovery in Argentina, every single person we talked to told us that like a Solana community didn't exist. It was primarily filled with Ethereans and Bitcoiners. But after we launched our video and kind of went viral, we've like met a lot of people within the Solana ecosystem who've been around for a very long time, especially like artists and people like in the creator economy, extremely successful ones that reside within Buenos Aires. Basket. Like Mills, Exchange Art Team, Star Atlas, apparently, the huge game, they have a lot of people down there and a lot of really like technical talent, that's been working as like open source contributors to a bunch of different protocols. So I'm really excited for them to come. And then we have some people from the government coming, but on the Solana side, I think, Hard Hat Chat and Ore is a really good example. We've been talking to the actual team. They support freelancers across 128 plus countries to be able to earn in crypto. We've been talking to Sphere. They're building an amazing B2B payments network that has over $100 million a year in volume. We're talking to Rex from Anza, who has the Solana Nations initiative that's thinking about, how, again, validators can drive local economic development coming. And so we have a lot of people who are actively working on things that help people earn their first crypto versus buy it. Like we're bringing a handful of Jambo phones with us. They're $99 phones where you have native SPL USDT now, which is huge. And they even have an educational campaign where you could earn your first handful of dollars by learning about crypto on their phone. And so this first version, I think future versions too, will be kind of like a mini science fair that focuses on like what I like to call like real world Solana for products that can genuinely help people earn their first crypto versus buy it. And so, yeah, I'm really excited because I think, that kind of combination of people who are working on those primitives, next to people from local government, local crypto communities, like next to policymakers who are really sophisticated and have a deep understanding of how these economic zones are structured and public-private partnerships are structured, will produce a lot of interesting results at the end, right? And even outside of crypto, we're actually talking to a lot of very large institutions that consult on immigration frameworks, right? Trying to figure out how potentially countries could co-opt or adopt a new framework for crypto talent visas, for example, right? If you're able to, through a ZK proof or something, show that you hold a certain amount of assets and monthly you earn an amount of, USD equivalent in crypto, you should be able to get access to a visa. And I think most people in Western countries don't usually think about visas, but I myself am an Indian passport holder. And, it's been very difficult for me to go stand in line for a 5-day Schengen to go visit for a business where I'm supposed to speak at a conference and then be denied. And I think that's really unfair, and better systems could exist for people like that. So things like that are something we're working on. And so I'm really excited about the type of people can we speak to.
Awesome. And you mentioned there was a bit of pushback maybe with Solana. What was your thinking around making it a Solana-specific economic zone? Does it exclude other cryptocurrencies, and are there other zones being done by Ethereum or Bitcoin or any of the other major cryptocurrencies?
That's a great question. I don't think within the larger Solana ecosystem, we're not trying to actively compete or put down other products. The Solana ecosystem tends to be its own critic, which is something that I really relate with a lot.
Yeah.
We're all harshest critics, even if you see Mert or anyone else, we're trying to see how we can really, and even Chad talked about this, right? The idea for school, for ORs to really be something that incentivizes the community to make Solana better day over day by creating something of that scale. On the local level, we got a lot of excitement, not pushback. What they were just sharing is that a local Solana ecosystem hadn't existed yet, which just wasn't true because there was no way for them to self-organize. I think a local community was not created. Most of these people weren't aware of each other. They're in our Telegram group, meeting each other for the first time, getting very excited about doing asados together. So I'm really excited. There's not an Ethereum focused one, but there's a multi-chain focused movement called Crecimiento that's happening. They're the people who actually got the regulated sandbox. They're the ones who are working very closely with a lot of local, government contributors, trying to really figure out how to set up this, future economic zone or the country for success in the long-term future. So we're even doing our, Solana Economic Zone within them, as a village, within the larger city, because we're always so down for collaboration. Because at the end of the day, my strong belief is that the best product wins, the best community drives adoption. And so whatever we can do to enable those two things is kind of the most important work that we could be doing within our next decade. And so the purpose of Solana Economic Zones is to do exactly that. We have a lot of contributors who are participating who are not from traditionally in the Solana ecosystem as well. People who are working in a lot of these real world applications and products or policymakers that have the experience that want to just come surround themselves with like-minded people. I think for us, it just, represents what we're personally excited about. Because Solana showcased that it has a very strong ability to be able to coordinate capital, talent, and attention, And so when we think about the long tail, it becomes a lot clearer as a message to communicate that with the government stakeholders that we're working with. Because again, it's very easy to coordinate and collaborate with the larger ecosystem. So,
yeah. And I think it's a good choice. Obviously I'm biased. But I mean, if you make it like an Ethereum economic zone, ETH1 is too expensive to transact on. And then it's which of these L2s are we talking about? And will each zone be using the same one? And then the other, probably the other major one would be something like Tron, or Binance Smart Chain, but both are pretty expensive. Tron is surprisingly expensive given how much
Yeah, it's
traffic
like
it gets
$1 to
through.
$3
Yeah,
per transaction, right?
it's
Yeah.
crazy. It's crazy. So, that
But
obviously has a huge amount of uptake from various corners of the world, but
yeah,
it doesn't feel very sustainable, and certainly the future of transacting money around the world in digital
yeah.
form.
I think Tron absolutely dominates sub $1,000 peer-to-peer transactions
Mm.
on chain for stables, like blank point period. I mean, EVM, they technically make up like, I think now $50 billion of USDT. And it's growing every single day. And so I think that's a massive opportunity for Solana and every single team too, and PayFi specifically that I talk to. I tell them, hey, let's kind of figure out what are, targeted ways and products that we can launch to have a very competitive offering to USDT on Tron. Exists in some format or the other within the Solana ecosystem, because I think that's really where like the technologies are going to shine. And so that's something that we're personally exploring and understanding how to enable, within these jurisdictions. And that's also why I think like Solana Economic Zones are a really good kind of like experimental venue to kind of test out some of these theses in a very short period of time. And so if we have any new learnings there, we'll let you know.
But it's a great point, because we've been talking so far mainly around USDC, but in reality, throughout most of the world, USDT is the most popular. And I don't know, maybe in Argentina that's also the case. And as you say, there isn't much USDT supply at the moment on the Solana blockchain. So you said about doing integrations with USDT on Tron. So would it be using the Tron blockchain, or would it be trying to get some of that USDT over onto Solana so people could use it there? How do you think about, getting over that issue?
Yeah, I think, it's about enabling the Solana products to be better, right? Is finding like existing distribution and adoption within the countries and then making a more competitive offer, right? The magic of USDT on Tron is the peer-to-peer liquidity that exists for the asset. If you walk into one of these, crypto exchanges that look just like your Western Union in Turkey, they don't even know what Tron is. They'll just be like, you give me one TRC20, I'll give you X amount of lira. Yeah. That's the kind of level of cultural adoption that it's gotten. And I really think the same is possible, not just for SPL USDT, but also USDC, PayPal USD. And now there's like a yield-bearing stable coin, right? That Paxos launched. And there's also independent stable coins that are inflation resistant, like international stable currency. So I think like one of the beauties of Solana is like the competitiveness that exists within the ecosystem. It reminds me of like the App Store in the early days, right? Just like on the iPhone. And so there are a lot of these independent products that might get ridiculous adoption in specific jurisdictions because they appeal to the cultural fabric of that country, or commercially is the more affordable and better option, right? Like how do we figure out now programmable wallets was just launched by Circle. There's a very big opportunity in a regulatory way, which is why we do some of this work, to help make it easier for some of these fintechs to be able to use programmable wallets, to use, USDT or USDT, whatever they prefer, on Solana as the primary method of payment, and have automated on-ramps and off-ramps, right? Because it now brings more liquidity into the ecosystem. So things like this are like long haul work, but that could sometimes lead into extremely short-term, like huge momentum, just by virtue of, what's that message going viral within one of these different countries. And so we're thinking about that a lot. And I don't even know if you saw, but in the news in Kenya recently, because of the protests and all the craziness that was going on, there's literally a news article where one of the leaders of a protest was like onboarding people onto Phantom and teaching them that it is a form of wealth of restoration and, civil resistance, right? So this stuff is happening organically already. I think making that end-to-end flow within each of these different countries, and particularly within some of these key regions, like I think of LATAM as a swing country, just like presidents think about certain states as swing states for elections. Like we have to make the end-to-end experience all the way from on-ramp to, being able to use it interchangeably within the ecosystem and larger integration to the financial applications and at point of sale, all the way down to off-ramp and getting access back to fiat. And so there's just like a great amount of work that needs to be done. And, the beautiful thing about Solana is there are people in the ecosystem who are fully dedicated to working on that problem. So if we can connect the right people together or connect them to local counterparts that can just make the user experience 5% better, the tailwinds of that will be massive. So I think it's very important we think about this.
And you sort of touched upon it a bit, but what are you seeing going forwards? What are the big challenges and big opportunities as you move ahead? Are you thinking about other countries? Or are you thinking more about improving this process about onboarding and offboarding fiat?
I mean, like I think Solana Economic Zone, we're going to be doing it in partnership with a handful of countries. We've
Nice.
already gotten inbound interest from a few African countries, some in Europe and APAC. But I think Middle East, Africa and APAC are highest priority, and hopefully we eventually make it all the way down to Americas too. But yeah, the idea is like, a handful of times a year, we do some of these longer ones, where we have very strong ties with the local government and they want to go deep and move on some really big programs fast. And then we do shorter ones that are almost like delegations, right? Where we go down and spend a lot of time with them, educate them, build the awareness, and hopefully can bring in the community to activate it, or can already connect people within the community who can, really drive economic development in one way or another within that country. So that's what we're thinking about right now. I think, again, the more of these we do, the more it'll evolve and the sharper our kind of like focus we'll get. But some of these other things are just like personal interest, and the foreman's personal interest, because at the end of the day, I think Solana has this magical opportunity to be the default financial platform for a lot of people around the world, not only the underbanked and unbanked, but even people who are banked, want a better system. So how do we kind of help, increase the rate of innovation, rate of adoption for the ecosystem? It's a big part of the work that we actually think about and do at Forma. So yeah.
Am I right that Superteam, which has various organizations all around the world, I think you're a member of the Middle East various.
Yeah.
Is that basically to try and bring the developers together? Because I almost see what you're doing is not just bringing the developers together, but just bringing the local community together, even non-devs, and just helping teach them ways that they can actually earn crypto, and then also business developers and entrepreneurs who could use and integrate crypto into their business ideas. So it feels like it's picking up, even more a larger bucket basically of all of these key areas around the world, as you say, these swing countries around the world, to try and bring more and more people on chain.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Superteam is very similar based on which country they're in, right? Mm-hmm. So what I've noticed about Superteam is that each individual super team is a very long-term bet on onboarding as many users as possible, and kind of also gathering a lot of the local resources into the economy, into the Solana economy, right? And so UAE, because there's a lot of interest at the government level, at the investor level, there's a high level of concentration and founders, is gravitating to become an amazing place for founders, right? Yeah. Philippines, on the other hand, they have a lot of people who are very interested in earning in crypto. Right. So what I've noticed is Superteam Philippines is starting to do an amazing place to maybe discover, a key market that has a lot of users to bring to your ecosystem. Vietnam has a really high concentration of developers. So does India. So I've seen that both of those super teams, not only do they have the other parts, but have an abundance of the latter. Right. And so the beautiful thing about super teams, I think, is they're very strategic, localized initiatives that are primarily driven by, and I think actually Lily talked about this idea of like community founders. Like people who have the exact same level of intensity as a venture-backed founder, but their sole purpose is to kind of like figure out and solve and co-organize an amazing community and build dedicated efforts within that local jurisdiction. They're doing amazing work there. I think for us, we just come in and really accelerate some of the top-down stuff, right? Directly interact with the government. Like Babak has over a decade of experience of doing that, understanding how to help with the policy side, even for some existing institutions and startups on Solana. And at the same time, maybe enable some of these long-term bets to become very clear, so that more super teams, more communities on Solana, more startups on Solana can go and build their footprint within these regions. So we take a little bit of a horizontal approach, but we're kind of focused on enabling a handful of these key regions. So I think that's the difference. But my goal is ideally, we can build an amazing framework with Forma, just like, Akshay and Cash, and I think it was Dunmay who built an amazing framework for the first super team. And then that model gets forked and owned by a lot of amazing people who eventually run these physical Solana economic zones that are public-private partnerships that are independently enabled or in collaboration with the government and countries around the world. And we can continue to kind of test, experiment, and iterate on the highest level, right? To enable more economic mobility for people on the Solana network. So that's kind of our long-term ambition, but a lot of these things are extremely net positive. Mountain DAO has become this place where people go and do the pilgrimage to become the most cracked builder on the ecosystem. And, Island DAO is becoming like marketing like favela, right? So it's pretty beautiful to see, I think.
I think I love that framing, the idea that you're maybe the top-down approach, trying to get the governments more involved with Solana and with cryptocurrencies, whereas the Superteam guys are working more the bottoms-up approach. Which
is very important.
Yeah.
They give us like 50x more leverage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think it's great. And I'm really pleased to have got you onto the pod because I think what you're doing is going to be crucial if cryptocurrency is going to grow, if countries are going to become more familiar and more favorable to cryptocurrencies, and also, as you said, the digital nomads who want to bring in and earn US dollars. So I think it's a crucial job that you're doing. And love to see it. And any final message or passing words that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, our first Solana Economic Zone is in Buenos Aires, Argentina, from 19th of August to 15th of September. Wraps up right before breakpoint, so you can make it there in the nick of time. If you're someone building in PayFi, if you're a crypto native talent who's interested in the country and its future, the people are extremely resilient and optimistic, or just want to come learn more about what we're up to, you can find us at czargentina.com, and it's free for anyone who's coming from Latin America. So yeah, we'd love to see you there and, turn it into a really amazing festival where we can launch a bunch of awesome stuff.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to seeing Forma grow and grow into the future. And thanks very much for joining us today, Farhaj.
Thank you. Hopefully you can have an unlayered IRL in Argentina someday.